Hello, everyone. This is Ken Buchanan again from Century 21. We're here with another podcast for all things real estate Bay Area, where we look at any kind of topic connected to real estate, especially in the Bay Area, in Silicon Valley. Today, we're happy that we have Leo Siegel. Leo Siegel is an attorney at the Stone Siegel Law Firm, and he's going to give us an update on eviction issues, possibly rent control issues around the Bay Area. Thank you, first of all, Leo, for being here today.
You're quite welcome. Thank you for having me.
We're going through a lot of extraordinary events with the COVID virus. I'd like to start with a question that's not actually related to the COVID virus. As I mentioned to you before, this is summer right now. This is a very good time for buyers to look for a new home. This is traditionally the time when most property comes onto the market. A typical question, however, that buyers will ask me is, what do I do if my lease does not expire, for example, until the end of the year? So they'd like to buy property at the moment. However, they're currently responsible for a lease. What are the legal implications of breaking a lease, either residentially or commercially?
Well, as I always tell my clients, there's nothing morally, legally, or ethically wrong with breaching a contract, so long as if that breach causes the other party damage, you're prepared to pay them the money.
Okay.
Then it's a no harm, no foul situation. But in a lease situation, if you walk away from a lease early, you still owe the money to the landlord each month. But the landlord has a duty to mitigate the damages. What does that mean? Well, the landlord has to take commercially reasonable steps to rent the property out again or lease the property out again. Typically, that would involve advertising it in a commercially reasonable manner for the same rent as you were paying. If the landlord takes a month to find a new tenant, then you owe the rent for that month.
Right.
If he finds a tenant after that month for, let's say you were paying $4,000 and the new tenant's only going to pay $3,500 because he had to lower the rent, well, then you would owe $500 a month for the balance of your lease term. At the same time, however, let's say it's a landlord's market and there's 10 people that want to rent that property, and one of them says, I really need this property. I'll pay you $4,500 a month for it, not $4,000. Well, the landlord can't make a windfall at your breaching the lease, so the landlord owes you the $500 a month through the end of your lease term.
Okay, and that was going to be my follow-up question, really. I mean, we know that the Bay Area is a very hot market. I mean, there is a housing crisis at the moment. So even though the law might say the tenant is responsible for back rent, of course, we know the reality is, traditionally anyway, that landlords can find another tenant quite easily. So in your experience, if a landlord decides to go to court and sue for back rent, what is the typical outcome of that? Does the judge normally side with the landlord or with the tenant?
There's no usual. It depends on which judge it is. It depends on whether the judge likes which party or the other. But the long and the short of it is, if in that lawsuit, the tenant would have a potential defense, that being the landlord failed to mitigate the damages. So the landlord would have, if you can prove that defense, let's say you show evidence the landlord didn't advertise the place. Okay, he advertised the place, but instead of $4,000 a month, he advertised it for $6,000 a month. Well, he may not have found a tenant at $6,000 a month, but he might have found one at $4,000 a month. So he hasn't mitigated the damages. If you can prove that the landlord failed to mitigate, the landlord gets zero.
Right.
And there's authority to back that up. So the landlord's got to start renting it out at what you paid. If he doesn't find a tenant in a reasonable period of time, he's got to lower the rent successively till he finds somebody to cut off what the damages are. He's got to mitigate. Right. That being the case, if he can show that he mitigated, he's entitled to sue the tenant for damages.
Right. What sort of timing? What sort of timing are we looking at? Again, I posted an article last week about the fact that in San Francisco, apparently 1 in 13 tenants have walked off of leases, and we expect that there's going to be really an avalanche of these kind of cases. I mean, what do you foresee as a typical time frame that this is going to involve if a landlord decides to go after a tenant who's broken a lease?
In a lawsuit, well, if it's a regular civil lawsuit, since the courts are going to be just slammed with cases after this COVID-19 mess is over,
right,
it could conceivably take, on a simple lawsuit, over a year to get to trial.
Wow.
That wouldn't be out of the ordinary, and probably longer.
Right.
It's going to take a long time. You're much better off settling cases than going to trial in any case,
Absolutely.
especially cases involving real estate. I would say over 90% of all real estate cases settled without a trial,
Yeah.
whether it be through mediation or arbitration or mediation then arbitration. You're always better off settling a case rather than going to trial, because you never know what's going to happen if you go to a trial. With
Probably we're looking at something like keeping a security deposit. These kind of issues is probably going to make a lot.
It's all negotiable. Yeah, it's all negotiable. Before you even get to that, the parties should try to negotiate a deal.
Right. Right. Now,
So,
I asked you about people actually leaving and walking away from a lease. What about people, especially now with the COVID crisis? I mean, there are a lot of people who have lost jobs, lost income. What about those people who are actually intend to stay, but just physically cannot pay their rent? So what do you recommend for tenants, either commercial or residential tenants, who just cannot pay their rent at the moment? What do you advise them legally to do?
Sure. The legislature has recognized that possibility, and the Judicial Council of the state of California, which is the Supreme Court of the state of California, they have recognized that possibility. The Judicial Council has instructed the superior courts that it controls not to prosecute any eviction actions for 90 days after the governor lifts the state of emergency in California. And given the fact that we're on an increase in the number of coronavirus cases, not a decrease right now. It went up 5,000 cases yesterday, and it's still going up. The governor is not about to lift the state of emergency anytime soon. And even when he does, there's going to be a 90-day moratorium on evictions. The tenant still owes the rent. Let's say he can't pay the rent. What the tenant should do is go to the landlord and say, I lost my job because of COVID-19, or I've suffered a severe loss of income. I can't afford the rent right now. The parties can reach an agreement where the tenant pays half the rent. When push comes to shove, though, the tenant controls everything here and need not pay anything if he can't. He still owes the rent. Right. And supposedly when this moratorium is over, he's going to have to pay the landlord back. And it's the period of time that is paid back is negotiable. Up to 6 months is recognized in the moratorium. But my opinion is few tenants are going to be able to afford to pay that back.
Yeah, no.
They can't. They can barely meet their monthly obligations for the rent. How are they going to meet the rent and then a 1/6 extra each month? They're not. Right. And they're going to have to leave the property or get evicted at that point. And there's just going to be a slew of evictions.
Sure. Is there any, sorry to interrupt, is there any way that tenants can document negotiations that they're doing with the landlord? I mean, a lot of it is done orally, but is there any way that they can document this?
No. That's just like real estate contracts. You should never do it just orally. If you're going to have an oral conversation and reach an agreement, one party or the other should confirm it with an email afterwards. Dear landlord, this will confirm that we discussed compromising the rent during the COVID-19 crisis, and I will be paying extra. Just put it in writing. If the landlord doesn't write back and say, I don't know what you're talking about, then that's a tacit admission that that actually did happen. Right. So that should definitely be embodied in writing or confirmed in writing. But you asked what the tenant should do if you can't afford the rent, and what they should do is provide the landlord evidence that they've lost their job, or their hours have been cut back, or they're caring for a sick relative and can't work. Provide the landlord written documentation.
How can they document that?
A letter from their employer.
Small business owners, things like, nails.
It's difficult. How do you, yeah, if you're your own boss, how do you document that you suffered a loss of income? It's very difficult. I mean, I don't know if there's any way to accurately or adequately do that.
Tax returns. Okay. One last thing, why don't we take a look also at the flip side of that? I mean, what do you recommend that landlords should do, either again, residential or commercial, when they're in a situation where a tenant has either stopped paying rent or is only paying partial rent and is still on the premises, hasn't left the premises?
Well, since there's this moratorium in effect, the landlord cannot evict the tenant. Even if they're not paying any rent, the tenant gets to live for free under this moratorium, which is a very harsh result. But that's what the Judicial Council has decided in weighing who can best afford the loss. The legislature doesn't want 25 million people being homeless all at once.
No, without a doubt.
So they're letting them stay in the property. to stabilize the market. What the landlord should do is the best thing he can do to cut off his losses is to buy the tenant out. Unfortunately,
Yeah.
there must be some dollar figure that a tenant will accept to
Cash for
move
keys.
out. That's right, to move out immediately. Go live in a hotel, put your stuff in storage. I'll give you a lump sum payment. How much is it? How much do you want? And if the tenant is reasonable, great. The landlord should go for it, keeping in mind that it's going to be many months until he's able to evict this tenant, and he's going to be out the rent every one of those months. Isn't the landlord much farther ahead if he pays that lump sum now, if he can afford it, even if he has to borrow it, get the tenant out, and then re-rent the property at fair market value or whatever
Right.
value he wants, even in
Correct me
spite
if
of
I'm
the
wrong. If actually the cash for keys is accepted, he would be able to also bypass current rent control issues and increase the rent to,
yes,
as you said, fair market price.
because rent control usually does no longer applies if it's a new tenancy, if the tenant vacates. So there's an advantage in that way to the landlord, particularly if the rent structure is very low in the unit as it is. The landlord then gets to raise it to market level. The Tenant Protection Act of 2019 provided that rent control and required just cause to evict the tenant. If it's a single family residence, the property is exempt from the Tenant Protection Act anyway. But if the tenant is voluntarily moving out, even if the Tenant Protection Act applied, if the tenant's voluntarily moving out, the landlord can raise the rent to market level.
Okay, good. Okay. Well, again, thanks a lot, Leo. I mean, this is a really, really deep topic. Of course, we could spend, hours and hours discussing it. I encourage anybody out there, if you're a tenant, if you're a landlord, if you're in a difficult situation and you're not sure what to do, feel free to reach out to Leo. Again, his telephone number, his email address, his address will be in the post. You can also reach out to me. My name is Ken Buchanan with Century 21. Thank you, Leo, first of all, for being with us again. Thanks, everybody, for watching, okay? Take care.
Thank you, Ken. Bye now.